Thank you for listening to The Lawyer's Daughter. This is Jen Carroll, and this podcast does not have any video. I know I'm on YouTube, but that doesn't matter. I really appreciate you listening to the podcast here. Let's go get started. Okay, people, we're doing this. We're doing this thing. It is September 9th, and I'm calling an audible, which is appropriate because it's football season, right? It's September 9th, and instead of doing the last issues podcast today, I'm going to do that tomorrow because I don't care if you hear it before the debate, but I care if you hear today's podcast before the debate. So that's coming tomorrow. It's tomorrow night at 9 p.m. Eastern, which means at 6 p.m. California time and various times in between, because I don't even know who does daylight savings time anymore and who doesn't. But there you go. It's supposed to be 90 minutes. All of the major outlets are carrying it, whether you stream or cable or traditional, conventional television. And there are watch parties. I'm having a mini watch party with my friend Vi. So there you go. That's a mini watch party. We're going to be on the phone because she's in Texas, but she's definitely a blue dot in a red state and needs some loving. So we're going to watch it together. And I'm going to use one of the tools that's in the blog, the written part of this podcast. I'm going to use one of the tools to help listen to the debate. And I encourage you to potentially do it as well. You could even use it to turn it into a drinking game, which is I'm not encouraging unless you're safely at home and you know your limits, because debates can make you drink a lot, even without a drinking game. All right, so David Muir and Lindsay Davis are doing the debate. A personal story about David Muir. My mom loves him so much. She adored him, and I had to do a 2020 for the murder stuff. And so we went to Sacramento, and Mom was so sure that David Muir would be there for 2020 because this was a while ago, but he didn't come, and she was very sad. Nevertheless, the people that were associated with 2020 were delightful, and then we ended up back at ABC Studios in Sacramento, which allowed her to gaze longingly at the photograph of David on the wall. So, Mom, this one's for you. Mom's out there. I'm sure Mom's going to be watching this debate wherever she is. I don't know. I wish there was email in heaven. There's been so many times I've wanted to send her an email, or a text, something to just say, "Did you see this?" Because I assume she's up there having a great time watching all of this. All right. So the things are changing so fast in our culture. There is a new word, and I want to start, before we talk about the debate, I want to talk about this word because it's so important. And as a rhetorician, I love this kind of stuff. The new word is called sane washing, as in insane or sane. So sane washing, S-A-N-E, sane washing refers to the media's habit of sanitizing or normalizing extreme or misleading statements made by politicians, portraying them as part of conventional political discourse. Okay, so essentially what it is it's taking nonsense or things that don't make sense and going ahead and translating them into sense for people, because the reporters are going to do that work for, we're talking about Trump. Let's just face it. We're talking about Trump and the things that he says that make no sense whatsoever. Well, the media, and in particularly the big media, like New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, the big ones. I don't know if the LA Times has been doing it, but I saw they were part of that other study, so I suspect that it's happening there too. They are sane washing coverage of Trump, which is where his outrageous or false claims are often softened or downplayed. For instance, in August 2024, you may have seen clips of this. Trump's sitting in this giant big chair, and he looks like he just plopped in it to eat and watch a game. He just plopped in this chair. And he's on a stage, and he's barely holding the mic up to his mouth as it leans on the armrest of the chair. You know the pose. Okay, that was when he was talking to Moms for Liberty. So during that, this is the clip you probably saw. During that discussion, it was essentially, a Q&A, a town hall or something. But during that discussion, Trump made, it's so funny. It's painful. It's so funny. Made the baseless claim that schools are secretly performing gender surgeries on children without parental consent, don't you know? A claim with no basis in reality. It was bonkers. You can find that clip. Trump basically says you go to school and the child comes home a different gender at their school. Jimmy, I think it was poor Jimmy he used as the example. Anyway, it's just nonsense. It's just never happened. It's like 9-month abortions. It's just not a thing. He can keep saying it, but he can't manifest it because it's not a thing. There's nobody getting a gender reassignment surgery at school. Guys, we can't get Tylenol at school. To get my daughter to be able to have Advil for cramps was an act of Congress. I'm telling you, anybody who's ever tried to deal with schools and meds, no, there's no way. I mean, it's just so ridiculous, it hurts. Okay, so this practice of sane washing means that the media takes these Trump remarks and makes them more palatable. They try to find little nuggets in there and they disregard what is dangerous or false or presents a risk. And it normalizes, this is the worst part of sane washing, is it's normalizing extreme statements because it lets them sit there and go uncontested, go unscrutinized, and it contributes to public confusion. You've seen the interviews of the MAGA people at these events, and they say some things that are just bonkers. But of course, they're being told things that are bonkers from OIN and News One and Fox News and all these places. So I'm just saying, you need to know that this sane washing is normalizing bad rhetoric and leads to confusion, and it weakens our democratic norms. And that's what I'm always watching out for, right? Because the norm is you tell the truth. That is the norm. You can stretch the truth. That's an American norm, stretching the truth. You can enhance the truth, but it usually needs to be based on some kind of truthiness. Remember Colbert, and he goes all about fear and truthiness. And we don't even come close with Trump. So we need to be careful because this is threatening our democratic norms, and it's just not reasonable discourse. Okay, so there, put that in your back brain, sane washing, because you want to watch for that after the debate. You want to see if people come out, media. Now, this isn't, politicians sane wash each other all the time. That's kind of like part of their club code. It's crazy, but you can at least see it's happening and you know they're all patterning off of each other. But when the media, who is responsible for calling out things that are bad, are not doing their job, our fourth estate, which we'll talk about, that's a real problem for us, and that's a real threat to our democracy. Okay, so let's go back to the debates. That's just sane washing. That's the word, sane washing. Thank you, Pam, this morning for the tweet to remind me of the word, big word. Actually, that was Nicole Wallace that said sane washing. Pam's given me this other one that's coming up in a few minutes. All right, so here's why we have debates. Presidential debates are really designed to give us a rare, unscripted glimpse of the candidates under pressure. That's really what it's about. It's to see when they're put to the test, how do they behave? What do they say? How do they comport themselves? How do they think? Are they able to do good thinking on the spot? Is the thinking mature? Is it reasonable? You definitely want to see mature thought. That's a big one. We often don't see mature thoughts in our presidential debates. So that's a big one. The debates aren't real in the traditional sense. So if you took logic and rhetoric in school, like some of us nerds, you know that in regular debates, there are rebuttals or logic games that are designed to showcase how this works. The goal in a presidential campaign is to make candidates appear presidential and or reveal cracks in their image. The first ever presidential debate didn't even include a president. So I guess that's not really the first presidential debate, but it gives you an idea of what was going on. It was in the primary season, that's why. It was held in 1948 between Republican Thomas Dewey and Democrat Harold Stassen during primary season. But today's modern debates really began with the 1960s showdown between JFK and Nixon. It wasn't about what they said, but how they looked. Now, this is a classic story, but there's a chance you may never have heard of this, especially if you didn't study poli-sci, psychology, rhetoric, any of those things. In 1960, tanned and poised, Kennedy faced a tired Nixon who had just come out of the hospital. And Nixon, as you know, compared to Kennedy, not an attractive figure. Nixon, compared to anyone, is not an attractive figure. Very jowly. Looked a bit like an unneutered cat in the face there with the big jowls. No offense to all the unneutered cats out there, but you know who you are. During when the two got up there, Kennedy, who was tanned and poised, and Nixon, who just left the hospital, so I'm guessing he was kind of three shades of gray. Those who listened to the radio thought Nixon had won, but Kennedy was the clear victor on television. The moment convinced us that debates were here to stay because in the era of television, the image could sway the election. Kennedy won the election. Kennedy looked like a gold Adonis compared to, Nixon. But then we get Nixon later. It's just important that you understand this was critical because how you comport yourself on television is what made such a dramatic shift in the way we used to listen to our leaders previously. We used to do it auditory, right? It was all in our ears. It was a radio address. It was fireside chats. It was all those kinds of things. If you're too young for all this, me too. I'm just saying that all of us who've been in a world of television, which is basically Gen X forward, yeah. Television, there's some baby boomers too, but really TV came about right when we were all kind of our cognition was working. So there's a whole generation of Gen X. That's when we knew TV. So that's how we knew what debates were. It all kind of coalesced all in the 60s. In 1980, Reagan was famous for his big debate. He was up there against Jimmy Carter. And the debates had started to kind of become a thing. And so we have the smooth talking former actor, Ronald Reagan, who knew how to play the camera and the crowd. Carter, who was dealing with economic crises and a shaky presidency, Carter was the incumbent, was the clear underdog. And one thing about Carter always, even though he was a good person trying to do the good thing, he was almost too good. He didn't belong in politics. They just chastised this man. They crushed him. And that's what he looked like. He looked like he was just crushed. Remember, in 1980 as well, there was an Iranian hostage crisis going on, and Reagan, much like Trump now, had negotiated ahead of time and asked them to hold the hostages till after the election so Reagan could be a hero. This is some of the most corrupt crap I've ever heard because there are real human beings that are hostages, just like right now, and we're all just playing a game that we can do this for politics. That's the cravenness of politicians. And it's typically coming at us from the Republican side. This is typically their pattern, which is unfortunate. Reagan used his wit to dismantle Carter's criticisms, dropping the now famous line, "There you go again." And I can't do it. I can't do my Reagan. It was to disarm an attack on his Medicare policy. So basically, when Jimmy went after it, Reagan just pulled the old mocking, "There you go again, like you can't get off of this. You can't stop talking about it." And so the crowd laughed, and Reagan didn't just win the debate, he won hearts. The moment became a defining moment for his political career, and Carter, by contrast, came across as worn out, much like Nixon in 1960. Reagan's landslide victory was a testament to the power of a perfectly timed line. So this is, and at that point, we had gone from 60 million to 80 million people watching the debate. This is interesting because I think Kamala could actually absolutely make Reagan look like a Jabba the Hutt by just coming in crisp and clean and fresh like she does. She just has this, she has innate energy. It just comes from her. It's like me when I put on Uptown Funk, innate energy. Anyway, let's go on to 2008 because I just want to give you a sense of how these debates have built over time and what the stakes are. Because we already saw this summer what the stakes were. I didn't think Joe Biden did that badly, but I did think he looked weird in the debate. It was like a Joe Biden I'd never seen before. He didn't have oxygen behind his breath, then we found out he was sick, right? So you could tell. This was my test always with my mom, is I'd call her in the morning, and if her voice sounded like mine, like full-throated chest, deep breaths going on in her chest, I'd know she was okay for the day. That's what I feel like in some of these situations, like people just, like Joe Biden, he just didn't have a chest full of air. He did poorly. So there's tons of examples. And here's one in 2008 with Obama and McCain. Time passes and you forget how these juxtapositions went. But I forgot that John McCain was going against Barack Obama. But it wasn't a debate of quips and comebacks. Because look, this time, this is an interesting debate to me. Because it's Obama and McCain. These are actually two serious guys who took the job seriously. McCain didn't F around. I mean, he unfortunately picked Sarah Palin. I think his advisors hurt him dearly with that choice. There were so many smart women to choose from, and he picked an idiot. And that unfortunately reflected poorly on him. But it wasn't a debate of quips and comebacks. It was a tense discussion of how to save the economy, because that was also when we were having the 2008 housing crisis, and all of people had bought all these houses that were underwater. So they were financially destroyed. It was terrible. It was terrible. We changed a lot of banking rules after 2008 because bankers or mortgage lenders were letting people take out mortgages when they couldn't afford them. And they had terrible things like balloon pay. It was terrible. It was so awful what big business did to humans by the end of 2008. It was terrible. Obama's calm demeanor and ability to explain complex economic policy in simple terms won him the debate. McCain, in contrast, was criticized for seeming erratic at times. Ultimately, and Obama, that's like one of his things, right? He's smooth. Obama's performance helped solidify his image as the steady hand needed to navigate America through financial turmoil. This debate wasn't remembered for any one-liner, but for the palpable tension and high stakes of a country on the brink. And I'll tell you what, a steady hand is why I voted for Biden, and a steady hand is why I will vote for Harris. You really want someone who is not fast to act and thinks through their decisions and their consequences. And we just know the other guy doesn't do any of that. I don't even know if he ever really has a fully baked idea. In 2016, Trump was up against Hillary Clinton. Sorry, I read Clinton and I'm like, what? It was Hillary Clinton, and Trump was terrible. The debates took on a unique 2016 is when debates changed again. Let's just admit it. The debates took on a unique tone mainly due to Donald Trump's approach. With a background in reality TV and an unconventional style, Trump injected unpredictability and directness that was rare in previous presidential debates. His method of delivering sharp one-liners, personal jabs, and ignoring traditional debate decorum, which is manners, contributed heavily to the spectacle-like atmosphere. It was a spectacle. While Hillary Clinton remained more conventional in her debate style, focusing on policy and fact-based arguments, Trump's bombastic approach often made the debate more combative and less structured. Both candidates played their roles, but Trump's aggressive, unorthodox debate tactics drove the shift towards a reality TV-like atmosphere, and it's absolutely what his audience wanted. I remember as a woman, I could not stand how he was following Hillary around and kind of looming over her. You could hear my breath when I just took it in. That was like a scary moment for me. I did not like it. And I didn't like that was allowed to happen. That's just too real, It was just too real. And then in 2020, there was chaos and interruptions. The 2020 debates were a different kind of spectacle. Trump, now a one-term president, was facing Joe Biden, a veteran of the political scene, and the debate was chaotic. Trump's strategy was to bulldoze, interrupt, and overwhelm. Biden struggled to stay calm despite constant interruptions, and the moderators had difficulty maintaining control. You remember this one. This is when Trump showed up with COVID, only he didn't tell anybody he had COVID. And they all showed up without their masks on, that whole Trump tribe. So normal presidents would wear a mask when they can because they'd want to model good behavior, but Trump never models good behavior. So what are we talking about here? The debate was remembered not only for that's not how the sentence goes. The debate was remembered not for policy discussion, but for chaos. Trump's interruptions reached a point where the moderators had to change the rules for future debates, adding the infamous mute button to prevent candidates from talking over each other. According to Reuters, these debates illustrated how divided the country has become. So yeah, that's great. That's just great. Okay, so here's something that's important, because I kind of wish we would run our presidential debates more like a traditional debate. We call them presidential debates, but they're not really structured and they're not evidence driven. In a real debate, You would have questions up front and you would prepare. So it would be kind of cool if we just knew that the candidates are going to talk about 6 things. As I've gone through all the policies, it's taking me days, right? It's taking me hours. You can't even believe the prep. It's taking me hours to prep the stuff on the policies. Although I love it, it's really helped me understand the candidates really well. Now I know what I'm fighting for when I fight for Harris. I mean, I'm really fighting for democracy. But having these questions up front would be really nice because it means the candidates could come with their answers prepared and with their facts checked. But that's not how it works. Our presidential candidates come in mostly blind and have to respond to the questions they haven't seen before. And this shifts the focus from a good argument to quick thinking and improvisation, which means if they're not good at thinking quickly or improvisation, the answers are going to really suck and they'll probably use a technique to throw you. I don't think that's going to happen with the prosecutor because she's prepared for that always. That's how lawyers got to roll. They got to be prepared for anything. They've got to be prepared to be summoned by the judge. They've got to be prepared to go in camera and have a discussion with the judge or meet up at the come to the front of the when you meet the judge up at the top front of the court. You've got to do all that stuff. So you need to be prepared. And so you've got to be ready. It's interesting. We choose such a chaotic way that we want to surprise these candidates. I would prefer less surprising them with a gotcha question and more of make them prepare. Let them come in with their actual plan. Okay, the next is, in real debates, there's proof and fact checking. And this is really important. Evidence is mandatory in a real debate. You have to be able to prove the crap that you're saying. You can't just make a statement and then let it just sit there. So they have to bring solid, verifiable evidence, and the debate format often includes rebuttals. So you can say, wait, that's a good point, but what about this other study? You can discuss it based on facts. Unfortunately, in presidential debates, candidates don't have to provide immediate evidence for their claims. That's a huge problem when you have a Trump disaster because he just says stuff. Presidential debates, the candidates can make sweeping statements without being held to account in real time, which is why post-debate fact-checking has become so crucial. It's also freaking useless because nobody in the mainstream, all regular, normal Americans don't go back and do the fact-checking. They just don't. There's not even, in the old days, there was a way. You could at least be watching the same TV channel, and like the next night on the news, you'd see the story, but we're all not watching the same things. And I don't believe Fox News fact checks anything. They make up facts. There's a focus on style over substance. In a formal debate, how you win has everything to do with your arguments and your evidence. But in presidential debates, the style is preferred over the substance. How a candidate presents themselves, whether they seem calm, strong, or likable. It frequently influences public perception more than the actual content. And the Kennedy-Nixon is a great example of where that happened. Where Kennedy, I don't even know what he said, but he sure looked good, right? President Bay. Classic debates also have built-in rebuttals. So you say something and I want to rebut that. I want to say that's not true, or that might be true, but let me show you what's more true. That's a good one. That's a really good way to do a debate. But in presidential debates, candidates pivot away from direct rebuttals because they don't want to engage in this looks like a personal attack. Well, most people don't. There's one who does. But instead of engaging back and forth about the facts, candidates often deliver talking points or the soundbite. They try to land a soundbite, which is a lot of pressure. As somebody who's had to try to land a soundbite during the murder, it's a lot to have to think of what is it, the one thing you want to get through above all else. You got to try to land that soundbite. And then, of course, there's just plain old fact checking. We don't have any way. Presidential debates are more fluid than a formal debate, and the candidates can make claims that aren't verified. So this can leave viewers with misleading or inaccurate impressions, which of course then causes the day after nonsense of everybody yelling at each other and saying, that's not what he said, that's not what he meant, and we're back to sane washing again. All right, so while real debates focus on logic, preparation, and proof, presidential debates focus on perception, charisma, and how quickly a candidate can respond under pressure. There you go. That's what we do in America. I hope some people from other countries listen to this and go, oh, now I get it. So what to expect on Tuesday? I looked at some of the write-ups and what people are talking about, and here's what I've got for you. It's a pivotal moment in an extraordinary election. Kamala Harris is the first woman of color to stand on a presidential debate stage. So can we just all take a moment for that historic achievement? That's a big deal, and it kind of gives me a little bit of goosebumps right now. I'm having them. She's going to stand up there as the first woman of color on a presidential debate stage. Hell yeah. She's going to face Donald Trump, the former president, whose unorthodox style has already rewritten the rules of political discourse. I don't know if it's rewritten them, but it's certainly lit them on fire and thrown them in the dumpster. As polling, now here's, we're going to talk a little bit about polling, but I want you to know, I'm going to tell you about this polling too. I truly believe from everything I've read, and a person who likes polls, we're in a hot mess. So, and I'll tell you why. Polling shows razor-thin margins in key swing states like Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, with some even showing Harris and Trump tied. The debate's going to showcase their different visions for America, but you know it's really going to showcase their different kinds of behaviors and styles. That's what the debate's for. The policies of the podcast I'm putting together, if you want to know what kind of decisions they're going to make, take a look at the policies. But if you want to know how they're going to relate to Americans, watch the debate. That's how you're going to see how your potential new president comports themselves. Let's see. Okay, so Harris is entering the debate facing a slight drop in polling after a euphoric summer. So there's links in here. Pew Research is really who I relied on. There's a couple others, but I wanted to really get into the latest thing, and I like Pew because they have a good reputation. So polls show Harris is holding a slight lead in key battlegrounds like Michigan and Wisconsin, but Trump remains competitive, and he's tied with Harris in Pennsylvania. Both candidates are under immense pressure to deliver a memorable performance that could swing these undecided voters. But you need to approach these polling numbers with caution. Polling errors in 2016 and 2020, especially at the state level, have shaken public confidence in their accuracy. That's right, me too. Remember, in this time, from 2016 till now, we've also seen a ton of people stop using their landlines. And the reasons that's important, there's two reasons that was really important. Landlines were how polling companies knew they were reaching a household. A landline generally used to go to a household if they were going after, Americans, general Americans. We don't have landlines anymore. Landlines were also used for Nielsen ratings on television, but then we don't even have regular television hardly anymore. So many things have been disrupted by not having landlines for everyone. That has been probably the most significant variable that has changed how polling works, because you say, but Jen, I have a cell phone. You do, but I want you to tell me how many times you pick up a cell call from an unknown caller. That's right. If you're like me, you never do. Sometimes I have to because if I'm job hunting or something, but generally unknown callers, unless you're in a mood to be an ass and like goof off when they call, there's no reason to pick up that call. And that's what a polling place would look like, an unknown call. So improvements are being made to polling methods, particularly in the 2022 midterms, but it is still a significant challenge to predict voter turnout. And so there's two things here. Who are you going to vote for? And are you going to get off your ass? There's the big difference right there. Are you going to do something about it? I'm hoping we have a lot of Trump supporters who aren't going to make it to the polls, because honestly, I don't think they care that much. I really don't. I think there's some that are nuts, but I think the people that we see on social media and stuff that really care are not even Americans. They're Russians. So there you go. With Donald Trump back on the ballot, past issues like underestimating Republican support or relying on outdated voter models could resurface. Polls might provide useful snapshots, but they shouldn't be viewed as guarantees of final outcomes. Actually, that's even how I tend to look at polls. I tend to look at them as relative to each other. So I don't care so much what the real numbers are. I care if there's an improvement over time. That's one way you can use polls to at least see how something's trending, which might give you better information. It give you a better sense of where things are going. The Pew Research, Pew Research found that there's a sampling error. There's a few kinds of sampling errors in polling today that might really mess up that margin of error. So in a poll, it usually says plus or minus 5, plus or minus 3. That means how many more percentage points it could be off. So if it says plus or minus 5, it means it's 40% or it's 35 or it's 45. It could be plus or minus 5. If you think about it, that's a lot of window. That's a 10-point window, plus or minus. Wow. So the things that can, Pew is saying that these three things, I'll tell you what they are in a sec, these three things actually might make that margin of error twice as large. So now it's not just plus or minus 5, it could be plus or minus 10. Now you have a 20-point variance. That's huge. So here's where the typical mistakes are happening in these polls, and everyone is arguing the first one is absolutely for sure true, which is non-coverage error. So this is a kind of research error. It's called non-coverage, and it's when specific segments of the target population are not represented in the polling sample. Many sampling experts, like Grace, have looked at this, and they found that they're not reaching whole segments of our population, like young people, for example. So non-coverage, meaning there's whole audiences that aren't even being sampled in the research, that's a big deal. The next is non-response error. That's when certain groups of people who are selected to participate don't. So there you go. Non-coverage, you didn't get all the people you should have got. Non-response is a whole bunch of the people you went after didn't respond. So now you really don't know what they're thinking because they just blew you off. And then, of course, there's measurement error, which is a flaw in how the poll collects or interprets the data. This one's a hard one, but this is where I have to live in my job, is measurement error, because it's due to poorly worded questions, misunderstanding by the respondents, or misreporting of the opinions, which is everything to do with data interpretation. And you have to really work on those poorly worded questions before you ever go out to do your study. I mean, you would even potentially do a sample to see if your study even made sense, your research even made sense, and defined where you have poorly worded questions or where there are misunderstandings. That's what you can use a small focus group for that if you want, just to tear apart a survey. Those are all tools you can use, but they aren't being done because everybody's trying to go fast and they all want to get coverage and they want to get clicks and they want to get paid. Okay, so these things are not reflected in margin of error, and they should be, and that's why we need to look at polls with a grain of salt. Like I said, look and see if they start to trend. That's probably your best way, but make sure you're looking at the same poll because different polling groups have different methodologies. So what will the candidate strategies be? Both are expected to play to their strengths, but their strategies couldn't be more different. Trump, known for his combative approach, will thrive on the chaos and unpredictability. Of course he will. I don't know, that's his weird kind of superhuman food that he eats on, that he consumes for nourishment, is just the carcasses of his enemies, I guess. I don't know. His primary goal will likely to be to unsettle Kamala Harris, which he did do with Hillary Clinton, using blunt attacks and throwing his opponent off balance. However, with the introduction of a mute button put in place after his disruptive 2020 debates with Joe Biden, Trump's strategy of constant interruptions will be curtailed. This will force him to adapt, as he can no longer dominate the conversation by overpowering his opponent with interruptions. That's called being a bully. You all know that. Can't just be the biggest ass in the bar. On the other hand, Kamala Harris will focus mainly on remaining calm, and we think, this is all, by the way, predictions. Kamala will likely focus on remaining calm and policy-driven, avoiding Trump's attempts to draw her into personal exchanges. Her prosecutorial background gives her a strategic edge in staying on point and focusing on facts. And Harris will aim to project presidential authority and avoid engaging in Trump's personal and combative style, using responses to outline clear policies while dodging distractions. Oh, I can't wait to see if that's what happens. So now, when it comes to just style, we've talked about this, but I did include it. Trump's style is aggressive and overwhelming. He often relies on rapid-fire statements and personal jabs to disrupt his opponent's rhythm. So that's like, that's talking trash talk. He's a trash talker, right? On the basketball court, can't shoot, trash talk. If you can't do the thing, trash talk it. In the 2016 Republican primaries, he famously labeled Jeb Bush as low energy and continuously interrupted him, leaving Bush visibly flustered. Trump's challenge in this debate will be limited by his ability not to interrupt, potentially altering his effectiveness and breaking his opponent's momentum. I hope he's had to do it once in the 2020. When did Trump have the mic off? Oh, just now with Biden. That's right. Just this summer, he had to have the mic off, which is good for us, the listeners. It's really good for us, but I think he was still blathering in the room. So, but I don't think she's going to be distracted, because you can have, I mean, in a courtroom, you can have the people that you're trying mouthing off. You can have people in the gallery hissing at you. You can know that you're under tremendous pressure because there's gang members watching you. Like, Kamala's used to people in the room who don't like her. I'm laughing because aren't we all? Aren't all women used to having people in the room that don't like you? But yes, so she knows that. She's used to that. I don't think Trump's used to having people in the room that don't like him. I don't think he's used to that at all. I mean, that alone could be enough to disorient him. Harris's style in contrast is calm and composed. I suspect her debate performance, based on her debate to performance with Mike Pence, she stayed focused and measured, and even in the face of interruptions. She uses really precise and deliberate language, which is nice. That's very lawyerly, to present her arguments, and her now iconic retort, "I'm speaking," which is a very womanly thing to say to every man who wants to just talk over you. So any man out there who doesn't like when a woman says, "I'm speaking," take that in. Take that in about why you don't like it. Do you feel like it's condescending? Yeah. That's how we felt when you started talking over us. So if you're jarred by the retort, "I'm speaking," which means shut up and let me finish, damn it, you got deeper problems. Like, we need to go have some counseling. Maybe I'll just keep doing this podcast after and talk to you about how to work with women. Okay, so here's what to watch for. Kamala, poise under pressure, policy pivots, and breaking the mold. That's what we should see, some of those things. This could be very cool. For Trump, we have his cognitive ability to handle the mute button. So this could rattle him. We'll see. We expect him to maintain his personal attacks, and we expect him to try to use both his charm and his aggressiveness. You know how he does that weird, I don't know who falls for it. I know there are women who fall for it, but he does that cheesy smile. It's not a real smile. It's that smile. You know, the sound of making that kind of smile. Yeah, he makes that kind of smile. So it'll be interesting to see if he uses his charm. The audience expectations, how we consume it. All right, now we're down to the drinking game, ladies and gentlemen. Here we go. So for us, it's about as much about entertainment as it is about policy. I never go to a debate and expect I'm going to come away with a lot of policy. I do want to see that they can hold their own, that they can manage to keep their thoughts coherent when there's complete madness going around, or when there's somebody, or just when they're nervous. It's just a nerve-wracking event, right? You just know everybody's watching and waiting for you to fail. This isn't like a regular speech. This is a, come on, mess it up. I want something to talk about after this is over kind of event. So here's the rhetorical tactics that could totally be turned into a drinking game if you hear them happening. And it's hilarious. Okay. The first is called, this is what I'm thanking Pam for, the Gish Gallop. The Gish Gallop is a classic, I'm saying Gish, by the way, Gish Gallop, like a horse. What it is changing what someone said to make it sound worse or wrong so it's easier to argue against. So here's what they'd do. They'd say 10 false claims in a row, knowing the opponent will not have time to correct each one. It's basically like rapid fire. Pew, 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 pew. I'm going to accuse you of this and this and this and this because you're a nasty black woman who doesn't know anything about, you came from Oakland and you're a liberal and all you did is ruin the city of San Francisco, and they can't even, it's not even a real town anymore. By the way, San Francisco is still a very real town. So that's the kind of coming at you. Boom, 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 boom. It's a great thing to do if you're giving a speech. It's not a great thing to do in a debate. There's also the straw man fallacy. Instead of discussing the issue, someone says, "You can't trust him. He's a liar." So you could hear Kamala say something like, and 9 out of 10 doctors, you can't trust doctors, they're liars. They do this about the media all the time, they being the Republicans. You can't trust the media, they're liars. The mainstream media has an agenda. He came out with that in 2016. He knew the media was going to crucify him because he is a house of cards. So instead, he decided to turn on the media and make them the suspect. That's the straw man fallacy. So straw man being a case of one, and you just use an absolute to shut it down. You can't trust him. He's a liar. So drink. Ad hominem attacks. Big words that mean attacking the person instead of their ideas. So you so you're trying to make the person look bad and instead of the issue. So when criticized, say, for breaking a promise, someone responds, well, what about when you didn't keep your promise last year? Yes, this is a classic girlfriend-boyfriend in the parking lot fight. They're fighting about the fact that they're late and she has to go to the bathroom and he didn't brush his teeth and they got to get into the restaurant and they're outside having a fight and it goes like this. Well, you never brush your teeth. Okay, we're not going to resolve this fight in the parking lot if this is how we're going to argue. These are just ad hominem attacks. You're just making shit up is what you're doing. So, but you can continue that fight in the parking lot with whataboutism. Ignoring the criticism by bringing up something unrelated to what the person did wrong. So this is interrupting someone repeatedly during their answers so they can't make their point. So I do brush my teeth. No, what about the other day you didn't brush your teeth? And what about on Thursday night? You didn't brush your teeth then. I saw you came to bed without brushing your teeth. And by the way, Monday morning, I saw you do a bad job brushing your... Okay, there you go. The person, you can't fight with that, right? That's just nattering. What aboutism? Same thing as interruptions, cutting off the other person when they're talking to make it difficult to stay on track or finish. Okay, that's a classic man's. That's why Kamala said, I am speaking. This is a common mistake that men make. I know they're excited. I don't believe all the time they're trying to mansplain or to overtalk a woman, but they do interrupt. It's different than how women interrupt. And we can have a whole discussion about interruptions because that's like a whole study of rhetoric. But let's just pay attention tomorrow night. You can drink if there's an interruption. You can drink both sides. It doesn't matter who does the interrupting. You can get a false dichotomy, which is cutting off the other person when they are talking to make it difficult for them to stay on track by saying, you either support this bill or you don't care about safety. So the false dichotomy is like, you won't close the border because you want immigrants to take black jobs. Wait, what? Like, that's just bonkers, right? It's a false dichotomy. So you may not want to close the borders, but it's not because you don't want because you want immigrants to take black jobs, or you want immigrants to, our American immigrants, illegal immigrants, they're some of the most productive, hardworking people you've ever met. They not only they take black jobs, they're bringing in all the fentanyl. They're raping and pillaging and eating animals in certain places. They're taking over. They're voting illegally somehow. I don't know where, because you have to be a citizen to vote. It's amazing all the things that these poor people who are starving and desperate and frightened are doing. But, leave it to Trump. False dichotomies. You can appeal to emotion. This often doesn't necessarily mean a good emotion. Trying to make people angry, scared, or sad instead of using logic. So you tell a sad story about a family losing their home to avoid answering a question about taxes. Get it? You just pivot over to something that makes everybody go, oh, that's terrible. Here's a good example. I mean, it really was terrible, but it really did cause the pivot. When they started taking the children away from their parents at the border, that appealed to my emotions. I got insane. I became crazy. That was a sad story about a family losing their child to an American border policy. That made me nuts. And it was hard to deal with the border policy because we were so upset about what was actually happening. It's slightly different than appealing to emotion, but it's the idea how fast it can change the narrative, right? Once you hook people into their feelings, it changes the narrative really fast. And suddenly you forget to ask about the logic because you're operating on feels. Then, of course, there's the non sequiturs. This is a Trump, one of my favorites. I think this goes right up there with batteries and boats and sharks. Making a statement or conclusion that doesn't connect to what was said before. Confusing the issue. Non sequiturs are the best. In fact, often old women are some of the best non sequiturs. Actually, old men too, because they've lived their life and they can just give you these non sequiturs. So someone's talking about school rules and the other person suddenly says, what about the cafeteria food? So it's just, I call it being random. It's, when you're talking with somebody and you just go random, that's a non sequitur. Just random. Where did that come from? Thank you. That was just so random. And then there's the red herring. This is the last one, but this should be worth a drink if you hear one come up. Making it seem like there's only two extreme choices when really there are multiple options. So a politician talks about the environment, but the other person starts discussing jobs to avoid the topic. So the other person brings up the red herring. You're talking about something that the shark is a red herring. The shark is the biggest red herring you've ever heard of, because for none of us, nobody anywhere, I don't even know what it's tied to, this man started talking about sharks. And it's clear he's afraid of sharks. I don't know if he runs into sharks a lot. I mean, I live on the West Coast. We got them everywhere. We just had some orcas in the Monterey Bay. But we don't have a fear of sharks. Maybe because Jaws was on the East Coast. I don't know. I just heard somebody say that Jaws changed the world when it came to sharks. People weren't afraid of sharks psychotically like they are since Jaws. So there you go. Okay. So there's your drinking game. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 things. 9 things you can watch for. The Gish Gallop all the way down to red herrings and everything in between. Super fun little crazy things. And that's when you can take a drink or a puff or whatever you do. Have another pretzel. If you're Doug Emhoff, just have that little pretzel. Okay, so beyond all the immediate fireworks, the audience is really going to consume these events through a different lens. And we'll have post-debate fact-checking. That'll be important, with analysts dissecting every statement. And I'll see if I don't really want to do fact-checking on Wednesday. That sounds really boring. But I might do something with these 9 different kinds of approaches to listening to a speech. Because if we could get an idea of the frequency of these kinds of devices in a presidential speech, that would be awesome. In fact, I might even try to take the transcripts and compare them so that I can have the actual words, which is very different. By the way, that's another interesting thing to think about as we're wrapping this up. Notice you'll hear, if you were hearing the debates on the radio, it'll be different than if you watch it on television, than if you read it. These are all very, very different experiences. And in order for me to do the test against those 9 rhetorical constructs that can show up in a debate, I think I'm going to have to look at the printed text, because then I'll have evidence. Like I can actually point to it. So maybe I'll do that on Wednesday. I'm not sure yet. I'm expecting that this is going to be exhausting. So I hope you're ready for the debate. I hope you're planning to watch. I think it'll be great. It'll be a great way to get you involved in the campaign and either make you really angry or make you really excited. And I'll be back tomorrow with the foreign policy comparison between RNC, Project 2025, and the DNC. And the foreign policy is interesting. It's interesting. I didn't know it as well as I do now. So I've got that already pretty much prepared to do for you tomorrow. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to talking again tomorrow. Thank you for listening to today's podcast. Make sure you subscribe and rate, and I'll be back with another episode really soon.